Hi, Wayne Ammons here. In this broadcast, as with others in this 7-part series, I will be addressing issues surrounding the relationships between recent American presidential administrations and the nation of Israel. More specifically, this broadcast will address President Bill Clinton's administration from 1993 till 2001. I've been asked questions such as, why has the U.S. supported Israel, that tiny sliver of land about the size of New Jersey, ever since their Declaration of Independence on May 14, 1948? Another question, in reality, has America always supported the nation of Israel? And then, have different presidential administrations taken a different stance regarding that small country? And if so, what were the consequences, if any? And how about Bill Clinton from 1993 till 2001? Stay tuned. You're in for some very interesting information. You just read a promise God made to Abraham, the patriarch and father of the Jewish people, thousands of years ago. God said He would bless the Jewish people, and He also said that He would bless anyone that blessed them, and He would curse anyone that cursed them. Notice that these promises came from the Creator of the universe and everything within it. The United States of America is not excluded from the blessings of God's promises, and neither is America exempt from God's curses. We should realize that the Bible can be depended upon for truth. Consider Pharaoh, Haman, Herod, the Romans, the Crusaders, the Spaniards, the Germans, the list goes on. These people, these nations, are they anywhere near their former greatness? Are they even still around today? The Jewish people and the nation of Israel, they are still here and prospering. Throughout this presentation, remember that the land of Israel is the only piece of real estate on this planet that God called His own. And also remember that Jerusalem is the only city that God promises will be here even when others are long gone. Participation in dividing this real estate is a dangerous undertaking. Let's look at another scripture, this time in Leviticus 25th chapter and 23rd verse. Every person has a choice to believe or not believe that the Bible is true, but to ignore historical facts, well, that's another issue. I will be presenting a lot of both, so get a pen and paper ready to take notes and discover truth for yourself. I will be moving along rather quickly, so pause the video if needed. You've just met my friend, Professor Juan Ano. He will occasionally summarize the information I'm presenting to help you even further with your notes. God's plan for the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, it can easily be understood by studying the Bible. The prophet Joel, for example, stated that God judges nations that are involved in dividing this land. He also warns nations, including Israel, against dividing Jerusalem. Again, let's look at another scripture, Joel, the 3rd chapter, the 2nd verse. America has historically been used by God as a source of protection and blessings to the Jewish people. During 1991, however, there was a turning point during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, and this change continued into Bill Clinton's administration and onward. Do you have pen and paper ready? Here we go with some amazing facts and interesting anecdotes for your consideration. Fact: on January 16, 1994, President Bill Clinton met in Geneva with Syria's dictator Hafez Assad. They met to discuss peace between Israel and Syria, but the topics of the meeting were centered on Israel giving the Golan Heights, that is Israel's land, to Syria. The next day, a powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake occurred in the Northridge area of California, about 25 miles from downtown Los Angeles. The earthquake caused an estimated $25 billion in damages. Now, this is an interesting thought. Less than 24 hours after President Clinton pressured Israel to give away covenant land, a unique, powerful, and damaging earthquake rocked America. Was this a warning from God to America? Another fact: on March the 1st, 1997, Yasser Arafat, the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, left Israel for Washington, D.C. to meet with President Clinton. They discussed Arafat's disdain over the building of Jewish housing projects in a section of East Jerusalem by the Jewish people. The New York Times reported the meeting with this headline, quote, "Welcoming Arafat, Clinton rebukes Israel." Now, for 6 weeks, Arafat toured the United States. Israel was under constant criticism by the Clinton administration for the Jewish housing projects in their homeland, Jerusalem. Now, isn't it interesting? On the same day Arafat landed in America, that would be March 1st, powerful tornadoes plowed through huge sections of the United States. And during the 6 weeks that Arafat was freely touring America and spouting venomous speeches against Israel, America experienced tremendous devastation in Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio. And it resulted in more than $1 billion in damages. On March 4, 1977, the New York Times showed side-to-side linkage between the storm's devastation and the Clinton-Arafat meetings. Here is another fact. On September 24, 1998, President Clinton presided over a meeting with PLO leader Yasser Arafat and then the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss the stalled peace plan. The president wanted Israel to surrender an additional 13% of her land. On that same day, the headlines of the USA Today newspaper read that Hurricane George was gaining strength and headed towards the Gulf of Mexico. The hurricane slammed into the Gulf 3 days later with 110 miles per hour winds and gusts up to 175 miles per hour. 4 days later, on September 28th, both the USA Today and the New York Times displayed the hurricane and the peace talks together on the front pages of their newspapers. It's just so interesting. On September 28th, Arafat had addressed the United Nations and talked about establishing an independent Palestine state by May 1999 in the land that was occupied by the Jewish people. And the General Assembly gave Arafat a rousing and sustained ovation. Nations all over the world. And as Arafat was speaking, Hurricane George was smashing the Gulf Coast of the U.S., resulting in $1 billion worth of damages. Arafat finished his business at the UN and then left New York City. Hurricane George then disappeared. Another fact. On October 15, 1998, Arafat and Netanyahu met at Maryland, to continue the talks that had ended on September 28. The talks centered on Israel giving up that 13% of the West Bank, as previously encouraged by President Clinton. Discussions continued until October 23rd, when Israel then agreed to surrender the land for assurances of peace with Arafat and the Palestinians. So interesting. On October 17th, torrential rains and tornadoes hit eastern Texas and continued throughout the days of Netanyahu and Arafat's peace talks in Maryland. The national newspapers once again had the Middle East talks and disastrous storms together on their front pages. Now, when talks ended, so did the storms and flooding in Texas. President Clinton, however, had to once again declare a section of America as a disaster area at the exact time he was pushing Israel to give up part of the land that God had given the Jewish people. Here's another fact. On May 4th, 1999, Yasser Arafat was scheduled to announce the new Palestinian state on negotiated Jewish land. And furthermore, Jerusalem would be its capital. And meanwhile, another strange phenomenon was beginning in America. You remember that about 6 months earlier, Arafat had announced his intention to the UN about a new Palestinian state on Israel land. With time zone considerations, it was now May 3rd, when the most powerful tornadoes ever to hit the United States occurred in Oklahoma and Kansas. Winds whirled at 316 miles per hour, making them the fastest ever recorded. And at least one of the 50 confirmed tornadoes was being considered as an F-6 classification, an action that had never been declared in history. This tornado was over a mile wide and traveled 4 hours, covering 80 miles of ground. Now, tornadoes are usually several hundred yards wide at the most, not over a mile wide. And they seldom last more than 10 to 15 minutes, not 4 hours. Very interesting. On May 4, President Clinton had sent a letter to Arafat to encourage him in his efforts for his own land, stressing that the Palestinians have a right to, quote, determine their own future on their own land, end quote, and they deserve to, quote, live free today, tomorrow, and forever, end quote. On this very same day, Clinton had to declare parts of America a disaster area from the worst tornadoes in history. Another fact, on September 1st, 1999, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright flew to the Middle East to meet with several Arab leaders before meeting with Yasser Arafat, and lastly, with the new Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, on September 3rd. The purpose of Albright's visit was to restart the stalled Wye-Maryland Agreement from September. You remember? The meeting at Wye-Maryland was focused on what? Israel giving up 13% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. On September 13, the Israeli Foreign Minister and one of Arafat's deputies met to finalize plans for Israel surrendering this land to the Palestinians, and this later meeting was the result of Secretary Albright's visit a few days earlier. Very interesting. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Hurricane Dennis hit the North Carolina coast at nearly the exact time that Albright was meeting in Israel. The hurricane had literally been doing circles in the Atlantic Ocean until this meeting. But on this very day, the hurricane hit the United States. Now, it was only a Category 2 with sustained winds 105 miles per hour, but it nevertheless created tremendous rainfall and flooding not to just North Carolina, but to Georgia and Florida as well. This would prove to be extremely important when Hurricane Floyd arrived just 2 weeks later. Another fact, on September 13, the very day the finalization meeting took place in Israel to surrender that land, the National Hurricane Center was astonished at how quickly a new storm, Hurricane Floyd, had strengthened into a very dangerous Category 5 with sustained winds of over 105 miles per hour. And thankfully, by the time it hit the coast of North Carolina, it had diminished to a Category 2. But nevertheless, it caused the greatest evacuation in American history up until that point in time, with millions of people affected. With Hurricane Dennis having drenched the land just 2 weeks earlier, Floyd continued with destruction of an entire section of North Carolina. 28 counties were declared a state of emergency, and a few were extremely harmed. This was the greatest disaster to hit North Carolina since the Civil War. Interesting, wouldn't you agree? While the Israelis were meeting with the Palestinians to give away the covenant land as promised by the President of the United States, a monster storm ravaged almost the entire coast of North Carolina. Okay, here's another fact. On October the 11th, 1999, the Israeli government removed Jewish settlers from 15 West Bank hilltops. Just imagine your government forcing you and your family out of your homes. President Clinton's plan was being put into action. The settlers resisted this eviction, and the national media reported various confrontations. It was a time when the Israeli government forced its citizens to leave their homes, their rightful homeland, in order to gain peace with their enemies. And again, how would you feel if this happened to your family? Here we go again with something quite interesting. In addition to another devastating storm, Hurricane Irene, that hit North Carolina on October 15th, a powerful 7.1 earthquake rocked the southwest area of the U.S. on the morning of October 16th. It was the fifth most powerful earthquake to hit America in the 20th century. But it was located in the desert near a sparsely populated area. But the earthquake shook 3 states and tore a 25-mile-long gash in the earth. Hurricane Irene and this strange earthquake occurred simultaneously as Jewish settlers were being evicted from their land that God had given them. Another fact. On April 12, 2000, President Clinton summoned Ehud Barak to Washington, D.C. for a conference regarding the peace process. President Clinton wanted to get more involved in the process, so he called the Prime Minister of Israel. Interesting. At the precise time that Israel's Prime Minister Barak was in Washington to meet with President Clinton, the stock market collapsed into the NASDAQ's worst week in history. Another fact. Starting on July 12, 2000, President Clinton, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat met at Camp David, Maryland, to try to reach an agreement for peace. The talks continued until July 26, when they collapsed over the issue of Jerusalem. President Clinton was personally involved in trying to divide Jerusalem into Muslim and Jewish sections and to give away sections of Israel to the Palestinians. The Israelis and Palestinians failed to reach an agreement. Arafat, however, made statements that he was declaring a Palestinian state, quote, with or without an agreement, end quote, and tensions escalated after that meeting. So here is what's so interesting. As the meeting was taking place, tremendous forest fires erupted in the western part of the United States, and the fires exploded at the end of July and burned uncontrollably during August. By the end of August, nearly 7 million acres of American land had been scorched. Another fact. On September 28, 2000, Ariel Sharon, the famous Israeli general, went to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Multiple riots broke out in Israel. The causes were attributed to the failed Camp David meetings, when sections of Jerusalem that included the Temple Mount had been discussed. And by the end of October 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Barak's government had collapsed, largely due to increased tensions with the Arabs that stemmed from the Temple Mount, and Israel was without leadership. What's even more interesting is President Clinton's actions destabilized the Israel government. And at the time Israel's government was in chaos, the United States government was destabilized with just a few days later, as the U.S. Supreme Court had to settle a highly contested presidential election. Bill Clinton was shamed with impeachment trials. George Bush, the son of the previously mentioned President George Herbert Walker Bush, won the upcoming United States presidency. One has to wonder, would the new President George Bush realize the importance of supporting the Jewish people according to God's words? Or would he cow down to the whims of her enemies and allow them to negotiate over God-given land to the Jewish people? View the next broadcast in this series. You will be amazed as we talk about George Bush. I will also be posting additional broadcasts on relevant modern day subjects, so be sure and click on the subscribe button and the bell below to be notified when these videos are posted. And let others know about what you heard today by clicking on the like button. And this is Wayne Ammons, helping you find truth, and I hope you will discover it for yourself. May God bless you.